age at scan and age at birth from neonatal structural connectome with deep neural networks. So this is a cool picture, right? This is essentially a diffusion MRI scan from a newborn infant. So this could be from the next Einstein or the next Homer Simpson, and you would have absolutely no idea. And that's the main problem with diffusion MRI. There's just so many things happening inside that it's very difficult to tell anything out of this. So this is especially important for newborn infants because in the prenatal period, the brain undergoes some radical changes and modifications from early pregnancy to early infancy as well, and each day literally matters. It's very important, all the changes that happen. So this is what a bunch of really, really nice people have been working on for years now on the developing the connectome project to study the impact of prematurity on neurodevelopment. We've managed to have to get various MRI scans and various types of MRI from a few hundred infants. So for this specific study, we've had diffusion MRI scans from 524 infants who were born between 23 weeks and 42 weeks of gestation and scanned between 37 and 45 weeks. And for all of you to know, in case you don't, 37 weeks is the limit between prematurity and mature birth. So basically the objective is from these diffusion MRI scans to try to be able to predict some disorders. So is this baby going to develop some autism? Is this baby going to have some cognitive disorder or something like this? So this is the idea from diffusion MRI. So you first ask the question, does diffusion MRI carry this information? And the second thing is it possible to get this information? So since this is very complicated, we take it step by step, and we first start by predicting age. So the first thing that we do is trying to predict age of the baby, so that's the age at scan, and then we will get into predict the degree of prematurity, which is the age at birth. So again, you ask the question, is it possible to get this information from diffusion MRI? Because it's highly complex data. And if it is possible, how do you get this information? And this is, whenever we have such a complex problem these days, we call our best friend deep learning. Yeah, it's a cool picture. But yeah, so back to serious matters. I told you about the diffusion MRI, and you all know about this. So what we do from the diffusion MRI is we combine it with T2 weighted volumes. So and some knowledge of the brain. So we take the T2 weighted volumes and we segment the brain into 90 different brain regions, and 90 different brain regions, and we take the diffusion MRI data and we combine this to create what we call the structural connectome, which is essentially an adjacency matrix representing the graph of the connections of the different brain. So you can see here brain region 1 to 90, and again brain region 1 to 90, and how they're connected to each other, and the strength of the connection. So for example, this specific pixel corresponds to brain region 30, being connected to brain region number 75. And the same thing happens in here. It's symmetric because connection from A to B is the same as connection from B to A. So this is the structural connectome, which is a simplified way of representing the information that you get from diffusion MRI. But still, very difficult to interpret. You could have the next Homer Simpson or the next Einstein, you would still not be able to tell. So the basic idea of our work is to take that structural connectome, we take the lower triangle, because the information is just there twice, so we just take the lower triangle, we extract that, we vectorize that, we normalize that, and we get an input feature of dimension 4005. So that's 4005 connections between the 19 different brain regions that we have. 4,000 different connections. And then we input that into our magical, fully connected neural network. So the first experiment that we do is to try to predict the age at scan. So again, we take as an input the 4005 features that I told you about from the structural connectome, and we try to output the age at scan. So we use a fully connected neural network with 5 hidden layers, plus other methods like Gaussian normalization, dropout, etc. 80% of data is used for training and 20% is for testing. And we reach a mean absolute error on testing of 0.7 weeks and a correlation true versus predicted of 0.93 with very low p-value. So again, you can see on this graph the true PMA, so that's the age at scan, versus the predicted age at scan. And yeah, it's quite an accurate prediction. So we do the same thing with the prediction of age at birth, which essentially gives us an idea of the degree of prematurity of the infant. And this is a much more complex task because some time has gone since the birth of the infant, and they're all kind of at about the same age. So essentially, it's a more complicated task. So this is why we use a more complex neural network with more hidden layers, and again, more dropout and more dropout to avoid overfitting. So again, 80% of data is used for training, 20% for testing, and we obtain 1.5 weeks of mean absolute error and a correlation of true versus predicted of 0.85. Why should you care? That's a very good question. That's a question my parents asked me when I told them about my project. And I was a bit unable to tell them the answer because myself I didn't know. But after thinking about it and discussing that, I realized that this is actually quite important. So the first thing that it tells us is that the diffusion MRI scan, especially the structural connectome, which involves a lot of processing and noise in the data from the T2 weighted and from the diffusion MRI, still carries some very important information about neurodevelopmental maturation of the baby. So there is important information in there, and we should carry on studying it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the deep learning can actually make sense out of all this very complex data. And that's also very interesting. So we can see stuff and we can predict stuff with neural networks from this data. And then what we could do is, and that's also been discussed in the previous talk, is we can do some small and useful checks. If we have an infant who is born at 37 weeks of gestation, and my neural network would predict it to be as being born at 32, you might say, okay, something might be wrong with this infant, and it's worth doing further checks. So that's an interesting also. But the most important thing, I think, and the most interesting one is deep learning interpretability. So you want to ask the network, and you want to understand from the network, how does it specifically differentiate between an infant who's born at 32 weeks, 35, or 41? What specific set of connections are getting developed? Why are they, and at which specific time? So basically, how does it make the decision? And that's all we're trying to work on at the moment, and work in progress, and hopefully I'll be able to get something out of this soon and present that to you eventually. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Yassine. We have time for one quick question.
Hi, I was wondering how you segmented those 90 regions.
Yeah, it's not really my job. It's a lot of work. So on the abstract, that is on the thing, you have specific citations and specific reference to the papers where your segmentation is. So I would not be able to give you details, but unfortunately, it's Emma, please help.